For those of you who don't know, in June I'm taking a trip to London with 16 teenagers. We're going to learn about math and science from different cultures. We're also learning just about the culture itself and a few other things, London and Paris actually. Now, I have actually never, when I signed up for this trip, had never traveled outside of the country. I have traveled with students before, so that has happened, but I have never traveled outside of the country. Luckily, the company that I'm going with didn't decide this for me, but they have a program that they send all first-time group leaders to a foreign country, and they go through a tour themselves to learn the basics of how to do everything. Because then you're going through airport security and international travel and customs and all that stuff for the first time without someone depending on you, which is really nice. And I learned a lot. So 2 weeks ago, for those of you who don't know, I went to Barcelona with 40 other teachers, and I learned all of that. We actually did sit in classes in the morning and learned the ins and outs of student travel, and then in the afternoons we went like we were the students, and they had experienced group leaders that showed us how to do it right. I'm not saying I'm going to be perfect, but I feel a whole lot more prepared after that than I did before. And that being said, one of the things that struck me about today's lesson, or where it came from, was when I got on the plane to go, the little video started of all the safety procedures and all that, and most of you who've flown know, here are the exits, make sure you help the people around you. Oh wait, don't help the people around you until you help yourself. Put that mask on first, and then help the people. Now, I've heard that, I wouldn't say 100 times. I've heard it, 15 times, however many times I've done air flights. And it never really dawned on me, but I realized this is the first time that I've ever ridden a plane since I've had kids, that there is another human being in my life now that I would want to reach over and help them first before I help myself. And I do take comfort in the fact that humans do have to be told, help yourself before you help those around you, because you are no help to anybody if you pass out first. And that's where this all came from. Because I think as Christians sometimes we forget that we have to help ourselves stay centered and have a peaceful mind before we really can help those around us. Now, I'm not saying physically help. I still expect, no matter what's going on in your mind, you should be on a roof helping get a roof done, or anything like that. But as far as spiritual help and spreading the gospel and stuff like that, I really think your best way of showing people Jesus is through you, and the only way you're going to be that mirror and that let Jesus shine through is if you have a peaceful mind. Now, we're going to talk about three different things this morning, three different stories, accounts in the Bible, of different men that I believe showed inner peace as well as peace with God, and as well as peacefulness with others, and how that kind of relates to why I think it's important that we keep that inner peace. Now, before I go too much farther, I'm going to let you all on a really big secret. I'm not perfect by any means. I know. I eat too much. I eat out too much. I eat Starbucks way too much. That was pointed out to me by my kids this week. Do you ever not come to school without one of those drinks? And that was when it dawned on me, oh man. I have mistakes. My life is not perfect. But you know what? God knows that. And God also knows that when he looks at me, I have to be comfortable with where I'm at so I can take the next step and get better. I have to be comfortable with where I'm at, because if I'm not comfortable with what I'm doing, I'm going to be at war with myself. And there is one person in this world you're not going to get away from, and that is yourself. So if you're at constant war with yourself, you're never going to experience peace with others, with God, with anybody. So I'll also let you in on another secret. As Mike already furloughed, you're not perfect either. So you have to take that first step towards peace would be making sure that you're comfortable with who you are. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on what that means, and I want to focus on what some biblical examples of this are, because when in doubt, turning to the Bible is always your best form of action. So with that, let's have the reading.
So there's going to be 2 verses today, and the first one is in Hebrews 12:14. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. And the second one is in 1 Peter verse 11, and it's, let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it.
Thank you, Griffin. So, I'm going to have a lot of Bible verses this morning, and if you would like a list of them, by all means, you can ask me after services. But the first place I want to start is with peace with ourselves. Now, I'm going to be turning to Esther. In the book of Esther, we know the story of Esther, but I'm not really going to be focusing on Esther today. I'm going to be focusing on Mordecai and Haman. Now, those of you who don't know, Mordecai is the cousin of Esther, basically raised Esther. And Haman is the second most powerful person in the kingdom under the king, kind of the prime minister, as it were. For those of you who were in class this morning, the map that was up there, just turn that entire map orange. That's what he had control over. Okay? So he was a pretty powerful dude. Now, Mordecai played his role in the story of Esther in the fact that Mordecai was a security guard or a palace guard, and he found out about an assassination attempt for the king, and he told his cousin, Esther, who was the queen, and she passed it on to the king, and the assassination attempt was thwarted. Now, that being said, at that point in time, Mordecai really didn't get any praise for that. It was kind of written down and, for all intents and purposes, as near as I can tell from the scripture, forgotten about for the time being. So then, looking at Haman, as I said, Haman was this second most powerful person in Persia. And as we've known from our study of many of these ancient kings, they get a big head, and they feel as though when I'm better than everyone else around me, what do you generally do? Well, you need to bow to me. You need to react. And when that one person doesn't react that way, they tend to get upset. This one is a prime example of that. Haman was leaving the palace gates, and he demanded that everyone bowed before him, and Mordecai refused. Because Mordecai was Hebrew, and he believed that you don't bow before anyone but God, which you shouldn't. So Haman got really upset. Now, he didn't just want to put Mordecai to death. He wanted to put Mordecai, his family, everybody in the Jewish nation he wanted to put to death. Okay? So we have 2 very different people here. Now, the first person I want to focus on is the Haman side of the story. One of the first things that we need to notice is inner peace is not, as I talked about in the intro, not perfection. Inner peace is not, my day went perfect, I'm peaceful about it. Inner peace is an ability to, whenever bumps in the road happen or things happen, that I can still keep that calm, cool collectedness because I know who's got my back. I know or what I've got set up around me to be able to help me keep my world at peace. I would argue that if you are one that you're only peaceful when things are going right, that you probably don't have that good of inner peace. Sorry, that applies to any of you. The thing that's important here is that we know, first of all, have we set up things around us that have helped us to have the inner peace? Okay? But at the end of the day, we'll talk about in the next section, we also have God on our side, which helps us with inner peace. One of the things I read this week was true friends, True friends do not make problems disappear. True friends don't disappear when problems happen. And that really hit me because, I have a really awesome circle here, and I do not use the word awesome lightly, Gail. I have an awesome group, an awesome circle around me here that when I have something I need to pray about, I know exactly who I need to text, and I know that they'll do it. And I have an awesome group of friends that when I need help of moving something or whatnot, I know if I call them, they'll be there. Or when I need help making pancakes for my son's birthday. And that's very peaceful to me because it helps me know if I have problems, I can rely on them. But at the end of the day, even if I didn't have those people around me that I could rely on, I do have Jesus, who is the truest friend that you could ever have that I can rely on. So all those things combined really help when those problems come up to keep that inner peace. So I have to admit, this happened to me this week. I woke up last Monday with pink eye. I have zero idea where it came from. None of my kids got it. My wife didn't have it. I woke up with it. It felt like I was crying frozen tears. It was the weirdest feeling in the world. I've never had pink eye before. And of course, for those of you who don't know, pink eye is extremely contagious. So that meant I could not go to school. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't go to Menards even or finish even any of the tasks that I would normally do if I wasn't in school. Yes, Menards was the top of my list this week. I'm going this afternoon. But as soon as I realized that pink eye, my week completely changed. I had to get a sub for 2 days. I had to push some things back, appointments back, and all that jazz. But then what really was the difference was on Wednesday I got back to school, and I had a mountain of stuff to do. I had appointments that I had to make up, and I still haven't gone to Menards. But I hate to admit this, but I may not have been as cordial with the people that were asking me to put more on my plate when I already had all this to do. Now, a person that's truly at peace, did you hear that? A person that's truly at peace, I'm not saying me, probably would be able to be like, oh yeah, or no, I can't do that right now. I'll do it later if you need me to, or you need to find someone else. No, I was like, no, do you realize how much work I have to do? And I hate to admit that that probably is how I reacted, mostly to my wife when she called me on Friday and was like, can you help me move some No! I've got grades due in like an hour. So that would be an example of not great peace. Now, I am happy to say that I was not Haman. I did not seek out anybody's family or and say, I need to ruin their lives because they're trying to put this little inconvenience on me. Because that's really what it was for Haman, right? It was a small inconvenience. Should it really have affected him that this nobody, palace guard, would not bow to him? No, he could have gone his way and life would have gone fine. And because he didn't have the inner peace about who he was and didn't have that self-confidence in his place of power, because of that, he let this nobody push him to make this plot against an entire nation, and then eventually that is what get him killed by the king later in the story, or later in the account. So we have to be careful that when we overreact and we push back at people and don't have the inner peace, we really are hurting ourselves more than anything. And when we hurt ourselves in a Christian fashion, we're also probably hurting those around us chance at seeing Jesus, at seeing the Christian nature that we should be portraying. So don't be a Haman. There you go. So, as I said, one of the greatest things that we have in our pocket to keep the inner peace is Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? Still probably one of the most powerful verses in the Bible. Now, problems arise. Let's look at Mordecai. In case you were wondering, Mordecai is the person you want to be like. Mordecai, when he did his job. He was a palace guard. He stopped an assassination attempt with the king. And when he didn't get praised for it, did he march to the king's offices and say, hey, I saved your life. I should be in this throne room. I should be part of your inner guard. I need a raise. Any kind of that. No. He just went on doing his job as near as I can tell. And did that help later? Absolutely. when it came up later, it's what saved his life and the lives of the Jews, and I think also pretty much was the beginning of the Hebrew nation being able to go back to somewhat of normal life. So that small action had a huge effect on the history of the Jewish nation. Bruce probably can correct you way more on that than what I'm going to school you on for that. But it did sound like this moment in Esther is pretty much the start of the Hebrew nation being able to go back to somewhat normalcy. So we have this man who, doing his job, didn't get thanked, but he was okay with that. That to me shows extreme inner peace. Now, those of you who probably knew me when I was young and I started working, I'm not one that, well, let's just put it the way it is. I thrive on compliments. I thrive on praise. It's one of my love languages, for those of you who've done that study. I enjoy being told that I did a good job. Now, I did find out very quickly in work that your thanks is your paycheck a lot of days. Now, I also enjoy doing work and going above and beyond. Now, what I had to realize to myself was that, why am I doing this? Am I doing it for the praise? I mean, initially probably was. But I actually really just enjoy helping make other people's lives a little easier. I enjoy doing that extra little bit, and that is what I had to realize to myself, that's what gives me peace. Because if I wait for other people to praise me or say a good job, and that's what's going to make me do other jobs, then I'm going to very quickly become a not very good worker. And as we know, as a Christian, you should be the best employee at any one of your jobs. So, which is a whole nother idea. But the fact that he went in, he did what I consider the greatest thing a palace guard can do, saved the king, and just went back, all right, I'll go back to my gate duty. That is amazing. So we have that, and remember, at the end of this story, what happens because of it? It got brought back up. The king was reading his record of what was happening, and he realized that this Jew, this Hebrew, saved him. And when when Haman came in and said, we need to annihilate the entire Jewish nation, not by name, he was like, wait, that was the guy who saved me. And it all kind of came together at the end of the story. Esther is a phenomenal book if you've never read it. I think I had in here, if you want to hear the whole story, see published works. So, this comes with peace of mind. So, one of the things is when you have inner peace, you are going to be able to do the things you want to do, and you don't look for other people's appraisal. You don't praise. You don't look for other people needing to help you necessarily. You know I'm uncomfortable with who I am and what I need to do, and that's what gives me peace. Not doing a good job brings me distress, brings me inner turmoil. I will leave a job if I did not do the absolute. I can tell you there is a fence in town where 2 holes, I could not get them underneath the frost line. And this was 4 years ago, and I still think about it to this day because I worry that fence is going to heave up at some point. I don't think it will, but I couldn't get any deeper because it turned into rock. Now, that's what I convinced myself. It's rock. You know, you put rock. Bruce is over here thinking all the advice for me right now. But I do think about that, and it worries me because I don't want that to go on. So when a job is not done right, that gives me inner turmoil and inner war, and that is not what I like. So I like doing the best job I possibly can because that gives me inner peace, regardless of people praise or whatnot. I still like getting praised, so feel as though if I did a good job today, make sure you tell me. If you don't think I did a good job, don't lie. All right. 2 verses that come up with this. Psalms 34, 13 through 15. Keep your tongue from evil and your lips from seeking deceit. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. and the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears toward their cry. And then Matthew 5:38-39. You have heard that it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them and the other cheek also. For Christmas, my wife got a card game called Uncommon Questions for the Uncommon Couple, or something like that. And we both work at the same place, so our conversation dies out very quickly when it comes to work. So I thought this would be fun. So we started reading some of them, and one of the questions was, who is your arch nemesis? Now, what was really funny was me and Kayla both came up with somebody, and they're both from high school. And what I found heartening, so you're all thinking, he has an arch nemesis? That's not good. What I was thinking about both of us was, A, I've known Kayla for 8 years, and she's never brought this up. B, I don't think I've ever brought it up to her. So that tells me that, is this really an arch nemesis? No, it was someone that really caused us a lot of issues in high school. And the fact that it was someone from 15 years ago for me tells me that I've learned not to dwell on how other people act around me. We all have those people in our lives that are annoying and cause issues in our lives. You can all think of the name right now, it's okay. I won't tell anybody. But what is the difference between that and an arch nemesis is how you react. If that person hits you like water on a duck's back and it just rolls off, that's really on them. Don't let that disturb your inner peace. When it becomes an arch nemesis is when you retort and you come back and you bite back and you argue with them and you escalate the situation, which I'm not proud to say I did with this person in high school. So those things are all things that come with how do you keep your inner peace. Now, moving on, we have peace with God. Now, peace with God kind of comes as a twofold thing. Does your inner peace come from God? And do you have peace with God? I personally think they're the same question, but you may think of them as separate things. So the first thing that we want to answer is, how do we know that our peace is from God? Well, I would argue that true peace can only come from God, but we all know, if you watch any movies, there is that atypical bad guy that they're fighting back and forth with their arch nemesis, and he says, how do you sleep at night when you do that? And the bad guy inevitably says, like a baby, or some other quip like that. Now, obviously, because he's the bad guy, he probably doesn't have peace that is in line with God's thought process. So, and we are actually told, I think I have the verse that comes up later, that there is peace in this world that does not come from, or there's peace in this world. It is not true peace, but there is peace that comes from the world. But it is not truth. And I can't think of the verse offhand, but I know it comes up later. So we do have to be careful and judge our peace and make sure that our peace is coming from the Lord. So I have a couple verses. One of them was probably the one I'm just talking about. Because of your tender mercy of our God, whereby sunrise shall visit us on high, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. And Job 22:21. Agree with God and be at peace. Thereby good will come to you. Receive instructions from his mouth and lay up his words in your heart. How do you know your peace comes from God? Judge it up against his published works. Also, constant prayer and communication with God also helps. 2 Kings 22 and 2 Chronicles 34, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but Tom actually brought this up in his lesson a couple weeks ago, and it is about the King Josiah. King Josiah was 8 years old when he became king because his grandfather died, and when he was 8, he ruled for 8 years, I do believe, kind of keeping the status quo, and about the time when he was 16, he realized, I'm leading God's people, but God really isn't a part of the equation. And that really troubled Josiah, and he did 3 things, not necessarily in this order, but he first cleaned all the pagans out of the temple. I think by doing that, he found the book of the law and decided he needed to read it to the entire Israelite people. And then he went so far as to make an edict to annihilate or to take pagans out of the entire land of Israel. This is a man who, oh boy, man, whatever. This is a man who lived a life that would have been probably fairly peaceful. As a king of the nation, we all know there were bad kings out there that it did not matter what was happening in the nation. His life was probably peaceful and not taken upon. But it bothered him that he led God's people as an earthly king, and they weren't following God. This would be an example of worldly peace, but it troubled him that his worldly peace was not godly peace. And so, as I said, what did he do? Well, one of those things in there was he broke out the law, and he read it to all the people to start that domino effect of bringing God's people back to him. And so this, for us, as in now, where do we start? Well, the very first step would be getting baptized. Now, this isn't a lesson necessarily on the gospel, but if you have not taken the steps of death, burial, and resurrection, and going into the baptismal waters, you don't even have the first step of being able to be in that peace with God. But after that, as most of us in here are baptized, the steps that you need to look at is those things I talked about. Read your Bible. Make sure you're praying. If you don't do those simple things, they don't have the impact it has. If it just sits on a desk, it doesn't just absorb into your brain. When I was in high school, or college actually, I had a teacher that before every test he said, make sure you put your math book underneath your pillow tonight so you might be able to get some more out of it. That's not how it works. So, I've got 3 verses here. John 14:27, peace I leave you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. This is the verse I was talking about earlier. That the world has peace, but if you don't take my peace, you won't live that truly untroubled life and that not afraid life. And 2 Timothy 2:15, we've heard 1,000 times, study to show thyself approved. And 1 Thessalonians 5:16 and 18 is pray without ceasing. Actually, 17 specifically is pray without ceasing. All of these things are things that lead us to better understand what God wants in our lives, and with those things help us know that the peace that we're feeling is from God. One of the reasons that I love doing sermons, one of the reasons I love doing classes is because it really forces me to have a deadline for studying. And when I have these deadlines for studying, my prayer life tends to be better. And on top of that, how I act as a person also tends to be better. So I know very well that my studies and my prayer life are connected, and how I act more as a Christian is better when I do more daily studies. So, as a point, I can tell all of you, if you have not experienced that, I wouldn't necessarily say every day, but if you can start, if you only do it on Sundays, start adding in a Wednesday, start adding in a Friday, start making sure that at some point you're adding in a little more study into your life, and I can guarantee you, your prayer life will get better. I can guarantee you that your walk with God will get better. And your peace will get better. Now, the eventual goal is pray without ceasing. Study to show thyself approved. And you can get there, but you always have to take the first step. Psalms 119:65 tells us, great peace for those who love your law. Nothing can make them stumble. As much as it might be uncomfortable in the world, if you keep God's peace, your peace will never stumble. And that's what Mordecai taught us. That's what Josiah taught us. So keep those things in mind. and always stand for God. Romans 5, 1 and 2 says, "Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with our God. Therefore, our Lord Jesus Christ, through him we have also obtained access by faith into the grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in the hope of the glory of God." So last, I have peace with others. Now, peace with others is the obvious end goal. When you have inner peace and you have that peace coming from God, Jesus will shine through you. Or at least your body will become a mirror and shine Jesus' light to the world. Now, I was home with Zeke a couple weeks ago, and to keep him entertained while I was folding laundry, we were watching VeggieTales, and the VeggieTales story we were watching was David and Goliath. Now, as a kid, I loved the story of Daniel and the Lion's Den, and I loved the story of Joseph and the Magic Dream Coat. I didn't ever actually look that much into David, and in my mind, it happened a little differently than how the Bible actually how VeggieTales told me. And then you got to figure, okay, VeggieTales telling that way, I need to go check the Bible and see what it actually says. VeggieTales was right. So I went back and I read 1 Samuel 17, and the thing that stuck out to me in the VeggieTales story is from these verses that I'm about to read. 17, it's 28 through 30, not 18 through 30. Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men that Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and your insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle." And David said, "What have I done now? Is there not a cause?" Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. The thing that caught my attention was, I guess I always just assumed David walked into the camp, walked up to Saul and said, "I'll take Goliath," and then he went and took Goliath and the story was done. Not at all. What's happening here is David went down and gave lunch to his brothers, and he was like, "Hey, what's that guy doing over there, and why is he threatening our way of life and our God and all that?" And the soldiers were talking to him about it, and his brother got angry about the conversation that was happening. So much so that he started yelling insults at David. Now, what did David do? Nothing. He turned and continued, he said, "What are you angry about," basically, and then turned and continued talking to the other soldiers. Now, a couple verses down from here, it says that soldiers saw this interaction, and they took that to King Saul, and that's why David got his time with Saul. Now, the thing that shows me here is peace with others comes from the fact that the people that as much as it's not important what's happening around you to keep your inner peace, people do notice your inner peace. And that's what's happening here. David had a peace. David knew, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to see a bloody battle. I'm not here to look into that. And God obviously knew it by the many things. Now, David was a man of war, and that goes on to show, but he was there and he was more interested, why is God's people not standing up for their God? And so when his brother was doing that, he ignored him. He just moved on and he continued trying to figure out what he was initially trying to figure out. And someone took note. This comes from the fact of when you have inner peace and your interactions with those people that happen to get on your nerves on a daily basis, when you have those interactions that you are always showing peace towards them, regardless of how they're acting, it will be noticed. And when it is noticed, they probably will come and say, "Hey, I noticed that you do this. Why or how do you deal with that person?" I've actually been asked, "How do you deal with that person?" And my answer is usually somewhat a little bit of both. Because I'm just a nice person, No. I'll sometimes when they're, well, I believe that it's not my job to yell at somebody for their own idiocy or whatever, and I'll put in there something about God to put that in, because that is why I generally can have those. I know when someone's being angry at me, there's something going on in their lives, and they don't need anger pushed back at them, because they just don't. It's not helpful, and it escalates a problem. You create war between yourselves. And so that inner peace will help, and it'll be noticed, and then you might be able to spread the gospel that little bit more. I do believe this is 1 Corinthians 13:11. Says, "Finally, brothers, rejoice and aim for restoration. Comfort one another, agree with one another, live in peace, and the God of love and peace will be in you." When you learn to live in peace and respond with peace, as I talked about with that arch nemesis earlier, your response is what changes the whole situation. It's not about what the non-Christian, what the world is doing to you. How you respond will show you where your peace lies and where God lies with you. And it's kind of a good example. The world's noisy. It's always there. My new truck, by new I mean used and a year old now, but it's aluminum base. Anyone know what happens when it rains in an aluminum-based truck? It sounds like a tin shed. I did not know that when I bought it. I'm not saying it was a down point, but it is very loud. To a point that if it's really thundering and storming outside, me and Kayla tend to yell at each other to communicate. That's exactly what the world is. The world is that noise, and sometimes you might feel like you have to yell out to get God. You might have to reach out through scriptures. You might have to reach out in prayer. But the thing is, what we forget, God's right there. And that really helps settle the noise around us. So, Proverbs 17:1, "Better a dry crust with peace and quiet than a house full of feasting with strife." So, there are two things that I want to end with. The first is, when you have that life of peace, you should always stand to be the person that makes someone else believe that there are still good people in the world. Or one step more, be the person that someone believes in God because they saw your interactions. I find that the key to peace isn't in perfection. The key to peace is in, I know who I am, and I'm going to act the way I'm intending to act on a daily basis. Sometimes I might take steps back. Sometimes I may not make the perfect step forward, but I always am attempting to keep my life at peace. And that is what's going to help you move on, and not move on, but move through life, move through this noisy world with God at your side and with a peaceful nature. So, if you're struggling keeping peace with yourself or with God or with others, please feel free to come forward as we stand and as we sing. Have you a heart?